Hey,
Hey Rex, what do you think?
was good. I can you walk me back through the cycle, the boxes? Can you simplify that a little bit? Like, what is the stages or steps?
Yeah. So the stages or steps to set it up,
Or
or just kind of what it
how
is.
does it work? Yeah, what is it, the pain cycle?
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got a box up here for one person's primary emotions. And when I say primary emotions, those are the deeper, right? The deeper ones. I mean, we could talk about sad, we could talk about angry or whatever, right? But we typically see those. Um, the deeper ones that we don't see, those are the ones that we're trying to identify here, right?
Like, what would be a primary emotion?
Like fear and anxiety.
Yeah, like unloved,
Mm,
unsafe,
Betrayed.
Okay,
betrayed. Yeah, those kinds of things that we don't typically talk about or bring up because they're heavy, right?
Mhm.
They're deep and they're heavy, right?
Mhm.
So that's kind of what we have up here in this box.
Those are the
That's
emotions, or those are the
Yep.
behaviors.
Those are the primary emotions.
Emotions. Sorry.
Yep. So then I draw an arrow from that box to this one, which is the same person's behaviors,
Great.
right?
so
And those
somebody's
behaviors,
anxiety or fear might drive their behavior.
exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And that, so anxiety or fear is likely going to cause them to want to have some control, right? Because if I don't have any control of anything, I'm going to feel that anxiety, that fear of the unknown. So I'm going to start prying at the other person or saying, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to, right? And now I'm gaining some of this control back to try and work through whatever these emotions are, right? And that's how my brain has started to cope with this stuff. And so then we can kind of see how, well, now when I'm starting to do this, I'm starting to feel even more like, but I'm not really getting that control that I'm wanting and needing. And so I'm feeling more of it. So I'm starting to get into this individual cycle, right? But that's only half of the pain cycle. Does
Yeah.
that make sense, right? So then you just do the same exact thing by putting the primary emotions down here for the other person, right? That may be feeling like they don't belong and all that stuff, right? These primary emotions that are driving their behaviors. So there's another box here that would have their behaviors coming from those primary emotions.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
and then that feeds back into that. Okay. Yeah.
That's right. So then it becomes this cycle where when I react this way, it's influencing the other person's primary emotions, who then react. That influences my primary emotions. Then I react, right? So we go into this cycle.
The cycle. How can people recognize if they're going through that? I mean, how do they? Oh, wait, I'm doing it again. Like,
Yeah.
is there any way to recognize that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question because, like I said, earlier in the recording, is that's the first homework assignment. Is I want them to recognize that it's happening, right? And so it's easy, just like how I set it up with the patients. I start with the behaviors. It's easy to see the behaviors. We can all think of a time where we reacted a certain way that we're like, oh, come on, why did I do that, right?
Yes.
And when we right, so when we see that and we recognize that, that is really helping us to put ourselves into this cycle to say, oh, it's happening again. I just yelled at my spouse. I don't want to do that. I don't like doing that, but I did it and it's happening again, right? So identifying some of those behaviors that might be warning signs that we're getting into this cycle, they can start to see, oh yeah, okay. And a lot of it can be retrospective, right? A lot of it can be looking back. And that's some of the work that we do in therapy too, is to say, okay, so a fight happened, right? That's okay. Let's break it down. What were the behaviors? What did you guys see that you did that you didn't like, right? And now I'm starting to help them identify this pain cycle again, if it's hard for them to do on their own, right? But typically you start with the behaviors, and I think it's easy because we can all see those.
Yeah, I remember early in my marriage just trying to. My wife asked me what was wrong. I went to another room and I was like, I don't even. Just thinking, I didn't say it to her. But I was like, I don't even know what's wrong. And having to like learn to actually identify my feelings and my
Yeah.
emotions throughout the day, and how those were triggering me was such a big step. Have you seen this a lot with the people you've worked with where they don't understand their own feelings or their own emotions or not aware of them?
Absolutely, more often than not, right? And so that's what therapy is really good for, is to help these people identify those emotions, right? You're sitting in your room because you stepped away and you're like, I don't even know what's going on. I don't even know what I'm feeling, right? And so in therapy, we dig it up, we figure it out, right? We identify what those emotions are. Because if you don't know what it is, it's that much harder to do something with that, right?
Yeah.
If you're like, well, I don't even have a direction to go, right? So in therapy, we figure out what those are. And sometimes you get pushed back because I'm throwing out things like, well, it seems like if I were in your shoes, I might be feeling this. And they're like, no. And then they start to think and be like, well, I think it's this. And we're like, all right, let's go with that, right? And so in therapy, that's where we can really break it down and figure out what those emotions are. Because yeah, most people aren't even going to know. Well, I was betrayed when I was 4 years old, and that's coming up right now, 30 years later, right? And all this stuff. So yeah, it's a tough thing, and we can work through that in therapy.
It reminds me a little bit of a book I read a while ago. We interviewed the author. It was called The Seven Primal Questions. That kind of everybody has like a primal, like a hurt or something like that causes them to react a certain way, and they're not always aware of it. And it forms a lot of what they think. But anyways, I guess I'm getting a little bit off track, but it reminded me a little bit of that. This is really incredible.
Work. I think
Yeah.
that's a good. Mm-hmm.
I really liked that book, and it helped me a lot with that kind of thing. And I really remember, just like I said, 15, 16 years ago, learning to start identifying my emotions and feeling like it was like a whole new book or chapter being open, and gave me much more control of myself. Like you were saying, people are always trying to get control, but it's funny, like the more you try to control something, the less you're going to be able to control it.
Yeah.
And knowing yourself is really, like you were saying earlier, it's really the first step. And
so funny. Help? Can I just say, I just remember being a freshman at Utah State, and not to criticize my parents, but I remember walking around Utah State going, I don't even know how I think and feel. I was kind of used to someone saying how I thought and felt. Or, when I'd say, I think I feel this way. Oh, no, you don't. So I remember, I kind of know what you're saying, Rex. Even to this day, it's like, how do I feel? What do I want? I think it's a little bit of a predicament sometimes.
Oh yeah, it can be, and I really stress that with my kids. I'm like,
nice.
Hey, how are you feeling? Let's identify what the feeling is, because even then, sometimes it's like other feelings feel like they kind of overlap. So you're like, I don't know, I feel everything right now.
Yeah.
What's the base one?
Absolutely.
I was gonna say, it seems like too this approach to things can help people to realize what's triggering them, and when they can identify that, they can better respond to it. Do you have any examples of that, or?
Let's see. Yeah, I mean that couple that we were talking about. I always go back to them because they're just a great example of all of this.
That's an incredible story.
It is, right? And they did all the work, like I set things up for them, but they went and they did it. So, but no, I think the idea is, just identifying those behaviors, right? And so when she's controlling and that kind of stuff, that's an identifier, right? To look back and see, I'm feeling this. And then you said triggers, right? So what's triggering that emotion? Typically, it's the other person's behaviors that kind of trigger those on, right? And so identifying that, okay, you just said this, and so now I'm feeling this, but it's not always that, right? It can be like at work, my boss just told me that I really did a terrible job at this, right? And that has nothing to do with my marriage. However, that triggered one of my primary emotions to feel unworthy or whatever it is, right? And now I'm going home and I'm feeling this underlying unworthiness. And anything that my spouse says to me is going to just tickle that monster that's in there, right? And so now I'm going to react to that. So it's interesting. Yeah, you bring up these triggers, right? And it doesn't have to be within the marriage itself. It's anything that triggers those primary emotions. And so to add another point that I kind of mentioned before is the other person is not responsible for those primary emotions, right? I felt this unworthiness from a reaction at work before, right? Mm-hmm. And the origin of that unworthiness dates way back in my lifetime, in my childhood, right? So my partner, how could my partner be responsible for that emotion? And if they're not responsible, then they're not responsible to fix it, right? I've got to do something. I've got to react. I've got to work through this. And that's where the individual therapy helps out a lot, right? Is they can break some of that stuff down, and we can do some of that in couples therapy. But yeah, the trigger of those primary emotions can really be anything, right? So it's a great question.
That really is, I think, identifying what is triggering. And it's interesting because it can happen earlier in the day, and then it can just set off a chain reaction, because then that person's kind of riding on the wave of that emotion, and then it's affecting every action and behavior they're having that day, and how they're viewing. It's also tainting how people are talking to them, like their wife or their child. So they're like, oh, I was already let down earlier today, and it's all tied together. It seems like it snowballs into that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's why that's why if I was encouraging the one listener, right, that maybe their partner's not on board, that's why I encourage the person to look inward first, right? Because if we can recognize that I felt unworthy when my boss reacted to me that way, right? Now I have this opportunity to work through that before I even get home, before I even talk to my spouse, right? And you're right, Rex, you're influencing everybody else's emotions around you, right? And there's lots of these cycles that are going on, not just in your marriage, but in any interaction you have with any other human being. And so, yeah, when you're feeling that, you're likely coming off that way. And so when you're able to look inward and recognize where that's coming from and saying, oh, that triggered me, right? Now I'm going to work through this so that I can be a better person for others to respond to, right?
Yeah, you can regulate your emotion. And I always like to okay, I'm feeling this. Let me actually experience it. Okay. And then I used to call it grieving, like grieving certain emotions, and just then okay, I went through it. It's over. I deserve better. Moves on,
Yeah, absolutely.
My last question is, how do you help, or what do you have any tips for building or rebuilding trust between partners? Like that couple you talked about, it's incredible that they were able to do that. And I'm curious how they rebuilt the trust.
Yeah. So it's a tough one. It really is a tough one to work on, is trust, especially in a scenario where, someone's betrayed like that. Right. And so I'll go back to it. I'll keep going back to it, right? The more you understand somebody, the more you understand where their behaviors came from, the better opportunity you have to change the way you see them. And and that's how you trust somebody, right? Is, and just in general, as a therapist, you have a lot of people come in and they tell you a lot of things, right? And some of them are the confessions even, right? Of them doing bad things or whatever it is, right? Things that they regret. And as a therapist, you look at that person and you're trying to understand them and where that behavior came from. And you start to see them differently, right? If we can do that for the other person in our relationship, we open this door to be able to trust them, right? And to give, or at least give them opportunities to build that trust back, right? Because if that door is shut and you don't even want to understand why they did it, they just did something bad, like there's no chance. You're not going to trust that person ever, right? So to really be curious and to understand and open up that door, it can be really, really hard to do, especially if they've hurt you, right? But when we do that, when we gather that understanding and open that door, we can start to give them opportunities to build that trust back, right?
That's incredible, Greg.
Isn't it? This is not for the faint of heart, is it? Relationships? No.
No,
Yeah.
It just takes courage. It really does take courage.
yes.
Yep.
Wow.
Very true.
But it can be done. It can be done, right?
Yep.
It absolutely can be done, and it's hard. And if you put the work in, just like the example of this couple that we talked about, man, we can do it. You can do it. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
To quote the great George McFly, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything.
Yeah.
Amen. That's right.
Yeah.
It is definitely worth it. It's definitely worth it.
Jake,
Have a loving, safe relationship.
you have been very generous with your time. We're so thankful. Thanks so much for making time and sharing all this and for engaging in this discussion. Yeah, this is going to be a great episode. Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission.